Tasha stood behind the counter of the small coffee shop, her tired eyes scanning the clock. She had worked another long shift, her feet sore from hours of standing, but she was used to it. It was the same routine every day, waking up early, heading to work, and coming home late, with just enough energy left to cook a simple meal before falling into bed. Despite the exhaustion, Tasha always kept a smile on her face. She loved interacting with the customers, hearing their stories, and brightening their day, even if only for a few minutes. Today, the coffee shop was quieter than usual. The usual hustle of customers and chatter was replaced by a calm, almost peaceful silence. It was the kind of afternoon when the sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the wooden floors. Tasha often found herself lost in thought during these rare moments of stillness. She would imagine a life where she wasn't always working, where she had the time to travel or pursue a dream she had long put aside. But that dream always seemed too far away, too out of reach for someone like her. Just as she was daydreaming, the door opened, and the soft chime rang. Tasha glanced up to see a man standing in the doorway. He looked a little out of place in the modest shop. His clothes were clean and well-fitted, and his shoes were polished to a shine. His hair was neatly styled, and his expression seemed distant, as though his mind was elsewhere. Tasha could immediately tell he wasn't one of the regulars. He stood for a moment at the door, scanning the room as if deciding whether or not to step inside. Without thinking much of it, Tasha gave him a warm smile. "Hi there. Welcome to our coffee shop. What can I get you today?" she asked, her voice friendly but tired. It wasn't that she didn't want to help. It was just that, after a long day, the energy to be overly enthusiastic wasn't there. But she always made it a point to treat every customer with kindness. The man looked at her, his eyes briefly meeting hers before glancing around the shop again. "I'll have a black coffee, please," he replied, his voice low and calm. There was something about him that seemed a bit off, like he was trying to blend in but wasn't quite succeeding. Tasha nodded and turned to prepare his coffee. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice him more closely. He seemed different from most people who came into the shop. Most customers came in with a sense of purpose, talking on their phones or rushing to get their order. But this man didn't seem in a hurry. He looked like he was carrying a lot on his mind, though he wasn't showing it outwardly. He just stood there, watching her make the coffee, almost as if he was lost in his thoughts. When she finished preparing the coffee, she placed it on the counter in front of him. He took it with a small nod of thanks. "How much do I owe you?" he asked, reaching into his pocket. Tasha glanced at the price and told him, trying not to notice how much money he pulled out of his wallet. There was a thick stack of bills, more money than she had ever held in her hands at once. But it wasn't the money that caught her attention. It was the way he seemed completely unfazed by the large sum. He paid quickly and handed her a generous tip, which made her blink in surprise. Before she could say anything, the man was already walking towards the door. "Thank you for the coffee," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I appreciate it." Tasha stood still for a moment, staring at the tip he had left. It was far more than she expected, enough to cover several of her upcoming shifts. But more than the tip, it was his kindness that stuck with her. It was something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, not as a worker behind a counter but as a person. For a moment, she felt seen. As he walked out, Tasha couldn't help but wonder who he was. He hadn't said much, but there was something about him that felt different. It was as if she had just met someone who didn't fit the usual mold of the customers she served every day. There was a mystery about him, but not in a way that felt cold or off-putting. It was the kind of mystery that sparked curiosity. Tasha shook her head, brushing the thought away. She couldn't afford to get caught up in fantasies about strangers. She had her own life to focus on, her own struggles to manage. And yet, as the day wore on, and the coffee shop began to fill with people again, she found herself thinking back to the man. She would probably never see him again, she reasoned. People came and went in her life all the time, and most of them remained strangers. But something in her gut told her that this man was different, and that perhaps, just perhaps, their paths would cross again in the future. After all, she had always believed that kindness had a way of finding its way back to you. As she went about her tasks, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, even if only slightly. Maybe it was the tip, maybe it was the simple kindness he had shown her, or maybe it was just the way he made her feel. Important for just a moment in time. She had no idea then, but that brief interaction would become the beginning of something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. Tasha couldn't stop thinking about the man who had walked into the coffee shop the other day. It was strange, but something about him had left an impression on her that she couldn't shake. She hadn't seen him since that afternoon, and life had quickly returned to its usual pace. She focused on her work, serving customers, brewing coffee, and chatting with regulars, but in the back of her mind, there was a lingering thought of him. Who was he? Why had he left such a large tip? And what had he meant when he said, "Thank you for the coffee," in that quiet but sincere tone? Days passed, and the memory of the man seemed to fade. As new customers came and went, each bringing their own energy into the shop. Still, there were moments when Tasha would catch herself glancing out the window, hoping to see the familiar figure walking past again. But he never appeared. Then, nearly a week later, something unexpected happened. It was another slow afternoon, the type when the coffee shop was quiet, and Tasha had time to think. She was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door rang again. She didn't look up right away, but then she heard a soft, familiar voice. "I'll have the same as last time, please." Tasha's head snapped up, and there he was again. The same man, dressed in a neat, simple outfit that contrasted with his expensive watch, standing at the counter. She felt a flutter of surprise, followed by a strange sense of familiarity. She had never expected to see him again, let alone so soon. "Oh, hello. It's you again," she said, her voice light, almost as if she was greeting an old friend. "I remember what you had last time. Black coffee, right?" The man gave a small smile, his eyes softening a little. "That's right. Black coffee. Thank you." Tasha smiled as she turned to prepare his coffee, trying not to seem too surprised. She could feel his eyes on her as she worked, and there was a strange energy in the air. It wasn't like the usual customers she served every day. This man was different. There was a quiet intensity about him, a calm that set him apart from the typical rush of people who came through the door. As she handed him the coffee, their fingers brushed for just a second. She couldn't help but notice how warm and soft his hand felt, and it made her feel a little self-conscious. She quickly pulled her hand back, but he didn't seem to notice. His gaze was focused on her in a way that felt both curious and respectful. She hadn't realized until then how much of a difference it made when someone truly looked at you. "Thank you again for the coffee," he said, his voice calm but with a deeper sincerity this time. "I wanted to let you know how much I appreciated your kindness the other day." Tasha was taken aback. She had thought he was just being polite when he'd left her the big tip, but now it seemed there was more to it. She smiled, feeling a bit embarrassed. "Oh, it was nothing really. I was just doing my job." "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "You made me feel like a person, not just a customer. Not many people do that these days." His words caught her off guard, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. He wasn't just saying it out of politeness. He seemed to truly mean it. Tasha had always prided herself on being kind to others, especially strangers. She didn't do it for praise, but hearing him say this made her realize that maybe, just maybe, small gestures really did matter. "Thank you," she said quietly, feeling a little awkward now. She wasn't used to receiving compliments from strangers, especially not in such a genuine way. He seemed to sense her discomfort and smiled, breaking the silence. "I hope this doesn't sound strange," he continued, "but I've been thinking about our conversation. About your kindness. I don't meet a lot of people like you. And, well, I'd like to make it up to you somehow." Tasha was confused. "Make it up to me?" she asked, a little uncertain. I didn't do anything out of the ordinary. He smiled again, the faintest glint of something almost like amusement in his eyes. Maybe not to you, but to me it felt like a lot. I've been trying to think of a way to show my appreciation, but I don't want to make you uncomfortable. Tasha felt a wave of curiosity wash over her. She was curious about him, about who he was and what kind of person he really was. He didn't look like someone who needed help, yet there was something so humble about the way he spoke. His words didn't seem empty, and for the first time in a while, Tasha felt like there was more to this encounter than just a random exchange at a coffee shop. I don't really know what to say, she said honestly. I didn't expect anything. I was just doing my job. He nodded slowly, taking a moment to think before he spoke again. I understand, but I still feel like I owe you something. Maybe it's not money or something like that, but maybe we can work something out. Let me know if you'd be willing to meet me sometime. Tasha was taken aback. She wasn't sure what he meant by that, or why he wanted to meet her again. She didn't feel like there was anything special about her that would warrant this kind of attention, but there was something in his eyes that made her hesitate. I'm not sure what you mean, she said cautiously, but thank you for the offer. I appreciate it, really. He seemed to understand her hesitation. I don't want to pressure you. I just wanted to say that I appreciate you. And if you ever change your mind, I'll be around. With that, he took his coffee and left the shop, leaving Tasha standing there, feeling both confused and intrigued. She couldn't help but wonder who this man was and why he seemed so interested in her kindness. There was something different about him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. And as she watched him disappear out the door, Tasha realized that this was far from the end of their story. A few days after the unexpected encounter, Tasha found herself wondering if she would ever see the man again. She had tried to push the memory to the back of her mind, but it lingered there, as if something about him had left a mark she couldn't ignore. Every time the door to the coffee shop opened, she found herself glancing up, half expecting him to walk through. But the days passed, and he didn't return. At first, she thought it was just a strange meeting, a moment that had no real significance. People came and went in her life all the time. After all, she had her own life to focus on. Her job, her family, her responsibilities. The bills kept piling up, and the hours at the coffee shop were long. It wasn't easy, but Tasha had grown used to it. She had learned to keep going, even when things weren't perfect. So when the man hadn't come back, she figured that was the end of it. But one evening, nearly a week later, her routine was interrupted once again. It was nearing the end of her shift, and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the floor. Tasha was tidying up the counter when she heard the familiar chime of the door. She looked up, and her heart skipped a beat. There he was, standing in the doorway once more, looking just as calm and collected as before. This time, he wasn't alone. With him was a man in a suit, carrying a briefcase, and they both made their way towards the counter. Tasha didn't know what to think. The last time she had seen him, he had been so humble, almost reserved. But now, there was an air of confidence about him. He smiled as he approached the counter, and Tasha couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. She hadn't expected to see him again, let alone with someone else. "Hi again," he said, his voice warm, though with an undercurrent of something more serious this time. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Tasha smiled back, trying to hide her surprise. "No, not at all. It's good to see you again. The usual?" she asked, gesturing to the coffee machine. He nodded. "Yes, please. Just black coffee." As she made his coffee, she couldn't help but wonder why he had brought the other man with him. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but there was something about the way the two men stood together that felt intentional, like they had come for more than just a cup of coffee. The man in the suit looked at her briefly, his eyes sharp but polite. When she handed over the coffee, the man in the suit reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. "Just in case you'd like to follow up on the offer," he said in a low voice, his tone professional. Tasha took the card, her fingers slightly trembling. She had no idea what was going on, but it was clear that whatever was happening was beyond a simple coffee shop interaction. The card was sleek, with a logo she didn't recognize, and the name on it read, Victor Ashford. Beneath his name were several lines of contact information, including a phone number and an email address. She looked at the card, then back at Victor, unsure of what to say. What is this?" she asked, her voice small but curious. Victor smiled, sensing her confusion. "This is an opportunity," he said. "The last time we spoke, I could tell you had something special about you. You didn't treat me like a customer. You treated me like a person. And that's rare." Tasha didn't know how to respond. She had been kind, yes, but this wasn't something she had ever expected to come out of it. She was just a waitress at a small coffee shop. She hadn't done anything special. "I'm not sure I understand," she said slowly. "I'm just doing my job. I don't know why you want to help me." Victor's expression softened. "It's not about helping you, Tasha. It's about recognizing potential when you see it. What I want to offer you is a chance to do something more with your life. You're stuck in a routine right now, but I see something in you that could take you far beyond that." Tasha felt a knot form in her stomach. This was all happening so fast. She had been caught off guard when he left her that tip, and now he was talking about giving her an opportunity that she wasn't sure she deserved. The man in the suit, who had been standing quietly to the side, spoke up. "Victor believes in mentoring people with promise, and we think you're one of those people. We've been following your work here, and we'd like to help you build something bigger, something you can really call your own. All you need to do is take the first step." Tasha was overwhelmed. The more they spoke, the more she realized that this wasn't just a casual offer. This was something serious, something that could change everything for her. She felt the weight of the decision pressing on her shoulders. It was a chance, an incredible chance, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. Victor's gaze softened when he saw her hesitation. "Take your time. But just know that opportunities like this don't come often. If you're interested, give me a call. We can discuss the details." Tasha nodded slowly, still processing everything. She had always dreamed of something more, of getting out of the coffee shop and doing something meaningful. But this was different. It wasn't just a dream anymore. It was an offer, one that could change her life completely. As they turned to leave, Victor glanced back at her one last time. "Don't worry. We'll be in touch." Tasha watched them leave, her mind racing. She looked down at the card in her hand, then back at the now empty coffee shop. Was this really happening? Or had she just imagined the whole thing? She wasn't sure yet, but something inside her told her that this was only the beginning. Tasha sat at the small table in the corner of the coffee shop, the business card still resting in her hand. She stared at the name Victor Ashford, printed neatly in gold lettering. It almost seemed like something out of a dream. She had never expected that a simple act of kindness would lead to anything like this. The card felt heavy in her palm, as if the weight of the opportunity was slowly sinking in. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, excitement, and doubt. She had worked long hours for so many years, struggling to make ends meet, and now here was this man, offering her a chance at something bigger. But what did she really know about him? All she had was a business card and a few words. Was this all too good to be true? Her mind kept circling back to that moment when Victor had spoken to her in the coffee shop. He hadn't just been polite. There had been sincerity in his voice, something that felt real. He had seen something in her, and he believed she had the potential to do more than just serve coffee. But was she ready? Could she trust him? And was she prepared to take that leap? That evening, after her shift ended, Tasha went home and sat down with a cup of tea, trying to calm her nerves. She replayed the conversation over and over in her mind. She knew she had the drive. She had always worked hard, always pushed herself to do the best she could, even if the work was often thankless. But there was so much more she wanted to do. The thought of a different life, one where she wasn't stuck in a routine, was tempting, yet the fear of failure held her back. She thought about her family. Her mother, who worked 2 jobs just to keep the house afloat. Her younger sister, who was still in school, dreaming of becoming a doctor one day. What would they think if she suddenly took a leap into the unknown? What if she failed? They had always depended on her, even if she had never quite seen herself as a person who could achieve something extraordinary. Could she really be the person Victor saw in her? The clock ticked on, and Tasha's thoughts finally quieted down. The decision wasn't going to be easy, but deep down, she knew she had to at least give it a chance. If there was even the slightest possibility that this opportunity could lead to something better, she had to take it. For herself, for her family. The next morning, as she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was the business card sitting on the nightstand. It was almost as if it was waiting for her to make a choice. Without hesitation, she reached for her phone. She had made up her mind. She was going to call Victor. Her hands were shaky as she dialed the number. It wasn't like her to feel nervous over something like this, but she couldn't help it. As the phone rang, she held her breath, wondering if she was making the right decision. She had no idea what to expect, but there was something in her that pushed her to take the chance. The line clicked, and a calm, familiar voice answered. "Hello." "Hi," Tasha said, her voice a little shaky. "This is Tasha, from the coffee shop. I wanted to talk about the opportunity you mentioned." There was a slight pause on the other end before Victor's voice became warmer, his tone encouraging. "I'm glad you called, Tasha. I've been looking forward to speaking with you. How about we set up a time to meet and talk more? I'd love to discuss what we can do together." Tasha felt a wave of relief wash over her. The pressure that had been building in her chest began to ease. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, she felt like she was taking control. They arranged a meeting for the next day at a nearby cafe, and Tasha couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and anticipation. The next afternoon, Tasha arrived early. She wore her best dress, nothing too fancy, but something that made her feel a little more confident than usual. She wasn't used to this side of herself, the side that was considering something bigger than just surviving from one day to the next. As she sat down at the table, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment, the beginning of something that could change everything. Victor arrived shortly after, dressed casually but with a confidence that made him stand out. He greeted her with a warm smile and a handshake, his presence calming yet assertive. They exchanged small pleasantries before he motioned for her to sit. "I'm glad you called," he said as he sat down across from her. "I think this could be the start of something really exciting for you. You've got potential, Tasha. You've shown that by simply being yourself. It's rare to find someone with your work ethic, your heart." Tasha felt a flush of gratitude. He didn't have to say those things, but his words meant more to her than she had expected. She had always tried to be kind, to do her best, but she had never been the type to seek praise. Hearing him acknowledge her effort made her realize that maybe she had more to offer than she had believed. Victor continued, "I've been in business for a long time, and I've helped a lot of people along the way. But what's different about you is that you've already got the foundation. You understand what it means to work hard, to care about people. That's why I believe you can do great things." Tasha listened closely, her mind racing. Was she really ready for something like this? Could she step out of her comfort zone and into a world that was completely foreign to her? Her heart said yes, but her mind was still full of doubts. Victor leaned forward slightly, sensing her hesitation. "I'm not asking you to make a decision right now, but think about it. The offer is there, and it's yours if you want it. We can help you develop skills, start something new, something that will give you the freedom to live the life you've always dreamed of. You don't have to do it alone." The way he spoke made it seem so simple, but Tasha knew that it wasn't. This was a big step, one that could change her life forever. Still, the thought of not taking the chance felt worse than taking the leap. She had worked so hard for so long, And now it felt like the universe was finally giving her an opportunity to make something more of herself. She couldn't let fear stop her from trying. "I'll take it," she said, her voice steady now. "I'm ready to see where this goes." Victor smiled, the expression warm and full of understanding. "Good. We'll start with baby steps, and we'll go from there. I'm excited to see what you can do." And just like that, Tasha knew her life was about to change. Tasha couldn't quite believe what had just happened. One day, she was serving coffee in a small shop, and the next, she was sitting across from a man who had offered her a chance at something far beyond what she had ever imagined. The meeting with Victor had been just the beginning, but even as she walked away from the cafe that day, she could feel that everything was about to change. The next few days were a blur. Victor's team sent over some documents, along with a list of contacts she needed to meet with to get started. There were so many things to read, so much to learn, and Tasha wasn't sure where to begin. But she knew one thing. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. Her first few weeks were filled with meetings, brainstorming sessions, and learning everything she could about business, about how the world of entrepreneurship worked. Victor had arranged for her to meet with his trusted advisors, people who had years of experience in the industry. Tasha had always been someone who loved to learn, but this was a whole new world, one that seemed intimidating at first. Her days were long, and by the time she returned home at night, she was exhausted. But there was a sense of fulfillment in the work. She wasn't just doing something to get by anymore. She was learning to build something, to create something that could make a difference. And every time she faced a challenge, she pushed through it with determination, refusing to back down. At first, it was overwhelming. She had a lot to absorb, and there were moments when she felt like she wasn't keeping up. The meetings were filled with complicated terms and ideas she had never heard of before. She felt like an outsider, like she didn't belong in a room full of successful people. But there was something inside her that refused to give up. Every time she left a meeting, she would go home and study the material, making sure she understood every detail. She was determined to prove to herself and to Victor that she was capable of this. One evening, after another long day, Tasha sat down at her kitchen table, reviewing her notes. The papers were scattered across the table, and she rubbed her eyes, trying to focus. It was then that her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, seeing a message from Victor. "Great job today, Tasha. Keep up the hard work. You're doing better than you think." A smile spread across her face. It was such a simple message, but it meant the world to her. Victor had seen something in her from the start. And now, as she worked hard every day, she was beginning to see it in herself too. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a part of something bigger, and it felt good to know that she was growing, that she was on the right path. The next day, she met with Victor and a few others from his team at the office. They were discussing a new project that Victor had been working on, an innovative business venture that was starting to gain attention in the industry. Tasha had been involved in the early stages of the project, but today was different. Today, they were going to discuss her role in it. Victor looked at her across the table. "Tasha, I've been impressed with how quickly you've adapted. You've got an eye for detail, and your ideas have already started to make a difference. I think it's time for you to take the next step." Tasha blinked in surprise. "Next step?" He smiled. "Yes, we've got a big presentation coming up, and I want you to be the one to lead it." Her heart skipped a beat. Lead the presentation. She wasn't sure she was ready for something like that. But then, she remembered all the times she had pushed herself outside her comfort zone. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling up inside her. "I'll take it on." Victor nodded approvingly. "I knew you would. Don't worry. You've got everything you need to succeed. Just trust yourself." The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Tasha spent hours refining her ideas, rehearsing her speech, and making sure every detail was perfect. She had never been in charge of something this important before, but she threw herself into the work, determined to give it her all. The night before the presentation, she couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of what could go wrong. What if she messed up? What if she forgot something important? She had come so far, but now she was at a crossroads, and the pressure was beginning to mount. But when the morning came, she took a deep breath and reminded herself of everything she had learned so far. She had worked hard to get here, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her now. The presentation room was filled with people, investors, business leaders, and potential partners. Tasha stood at the front, the weight of the moment settling in. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart was pounding, but she forced herself to stand tall. She glanced at Victor, who gave her a reassuring smile from the back of the room. And then she began. As she spoke, her nerves slowly faded away. The words came naturally, and the more she talked, the more confident she became. She was sharing her vision for the future of the project, outlining how it could change the industry and how they could make a real impact. The room was silent as they listened intently, and by the time she finished, there was a brief pause before the applause began. Tasha felt a rush of relief and pride wash over her. She had done it. She had led the presentation, and it had gone better than she ever could have imagined. When the meeting ended, Victor walked over to her, his eyes filled with pride. "You did it, Tasha," he said. "I knew you could. This is just the beginning for you." Tasha smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. She had taken the leap, and now she was reaping the rewards. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but she was ready for whatever came next. She had proven to herself that she could do it, and that was all she needed. After the success of the presentation, Tasha felt a new sense of confidence bubbling inside her. She had stepped out of her comfort zone, and now, for the first time in a long while, she truly felt like she belonged in this world of business and opportunity. The feeling of accomplishment was intoxicating, and every morning she woke up excited to learn more, do more, and see just how far she could push herself. As the weeks went by, she settled into her new role with growing ease. She started to build her own team, working closely with other professionals who had been in the business for much longer than she had. It was humbling at times to be surrounded by so much experience, but Tasha wasn't intimidated. She listened carefully, asked questions, and observed everything she could. With each conversation, she absorbed more knowledge, and the things that once seemed complicated started to make sense. Victor, as always, was there to guide her. He checked in regularly, offering advice and encouragement. But it wasn't just about the business. Victor made sure Tasha knew that her personal growth mattered too. He always told her to trust herself, to know that she had something valuable to offer. She didn't always believe it, but the more she worked, the more she began to see the truth in his words. One afternoon, after a meeting with a potential partner, Tasha found herself sitting alone in her office, her mind racing. She had spent the last few hours discussing strategy, figures, and plans, and now it was all beginning to feel overwhelming. The weight of everything, the decisions she was making, the responsibility she had taken on, was starting to sink in. She leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath as she gazed out the window. The world outside seemed so far away, almost like a dream. The thought of how far she had come since her days at the coffee shop was almost surreal. She had worked so hard for so long, never imagining that one simple act of kindness would lead to all of this. It was hard for her to believe, but it was real. She had become a part of something bigger, something meaningful, and every day felt like an opportunity to prove to herself that she belonged there. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Victor. "Great job today. You're doing amazing. Keep pushing forward. We're all counting on you." Tasha smiled as she read the message. It was always reassuring to hear those words from him. They gave her the boost she needed to keep going when things felt tough. But today, she needed more than just words. She needed to see the impact of her work, to know that all the effort she had put in was making a difference. The next day, she got that chance. Victor had invited her to join him at a meeting with a group of investors who were interested in funding the next phase of the project. It was a big step, and Tasha knew it. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but now that it was finally here, the nerves started to creep in. As she sat in the car on the way to the meeting, she tried to calm her mind. She had done her homework. She knew the numbers, the projections, and the details of the plan inside and out, but still, the fear of failure loomed over her. When they arrived at the meeting, Tasha was introduced to the investors. They were a group of sharp-minded individuals, all with years of experience in the business world. They were here to decide whether or not to invest in the next stage of the project, and Tasha knew that the success of the meeting could shape the future of the entire venture. The room was filled with a quiet tension as the discussions began. Victor started the meeting by outlining the project's vision, and then it was Tasha's turn to speak. She took a deep breath and stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment she had been working toward. She began speaking, her voice steady but strong. She talked about the potential of the project, the market it was targeting, and how the investment would drive growth. The words flowed naturally as she spoke, and as she glanced around the room, she could see the investors listening carefully, nodding as they absorbed her ideas. For a brief moment, she forgot about the nerves. She was in her element, and she was doing what she had been trained to do. When she finished, there was a brief silence before one of the investors spoke up. "This is impressive," he said, his voice thoughtful. "The vision is clear, and the numbers make sense. We're interested, but we need to see more details about the projected growth over the next few years." Tasha nodded, her mind working quickly. She had prepared for this question. She opened the laptop in front of her and pulled up the charts and projections she had been working on for weeks. As she presented the data, she felt a sense of confidence she hadn't expected. She knew this inside and out. She could do this. The investors asked a few more questions, but Tasha answered them all with poise and clarity. By the time the meeting came to an end, the room was buzzing with excitement. The investors were impressed, and Tasha could tell that they were on board. As they left the meeting, Victor turned to her with a proud smile. "You did it, Tasha," he said. "You handled that like a pro." Tasha felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had faced the biggest challenge of her career, and she had succeeded. The investors were on board, and the project was one step closer to becoming a reality. As they drove back to the office, Tasha reflected on everything she had learned. She had come so far, but there was still so much more to do. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but with the support of Victor and her team, she was ready to face whatever came next. She had proven to herself that she was capable of much more than she had ever imagined, and the future was finally within her reach. Weeks passed, and Tasha's world seemed to keep expanding. The project that had once seemed so distant and overwhelming was now steadily growing, and so was she. It was as if everything she had worked for, every step she had taken, had led her to this moment. The momentum she had built from the early days of her new role was carrying her forward, and with each new challenge, she felt a little more confident, a little more like she belonged in the business world she was now a part of. Despite the excitement, there were moments when doubt crept in. She had come so far from her days at the coffee shop, but sometimes the weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever. She had people depending on her decisions now, and she felt the pressure to make the right choices. She still remembered her first days in the business world, how out of place she had felt, how she had worried that she wasn't good enough. Now she was in a much different position, but the fears still lingered in the back of her mind. Victor had been a constant source of support throughout all of this. He had believed in her from the beginning, and his encouragement had been the thing that kept her going when she doubted herself. It wasn't just the business advice he offered. It was his faith in her, his quiet but unwavering belief that she could do this. He never pushed her too hard, but always made sure she knew she had what it took to succeed. and when she started to feel overwhelmed, he would remind her to trust herself. One afternoon, Tasha was sitting in her office, reviewing the latest progress reports for the project. The team had been working around the clock, and things were moving along nicely, but there were still a lot of details to iron out. She had always been someone who liked to be in control, but as the project expanded, so did the number of tasks and people she had to manage. The learning curve had been steep, but she was doing it. Every day, she grew more skilled, more capable. Her phone buzzed, and she looked down to see a message from Victor. "Meeting at 3 p.m. today. We need to discuss next steps. See you then." Tasha took a deep breath and closed her laptop. She knew this was another important meeting. But this time, something felt different. She had been working so hard, and now she felt like the next stage of the project was finally within her grasp. But with that thought, a knot tightened in her stomach. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about her future, about the kind of leader she wanted to be. When she arrived at the meeting, Victor was already there, looking calm as ever. There were a few other team members present as well, people who had been working with him for years, seasoned professionals who knew the ropes much better than she did. Tasha took her seat, feeling a wave of nervousness. She had never been afraid of hard work, but this was something new. This meeting wasn't just about the project's next phase. It was about solidifying her place in this world. Victor gave her a knowing smile as the meeting began. He had a way of making her feel at ease, even in the most stressful situations. "Tasha, you've done incredible work up until this point," he began. "And now we're moving into the next phase of the project. You've earned the right to lead this part." Tasha looked around the room, seeing the faces of the people who had been working with Victor for years. They all seemed to be waiting for her to speak, waiting for her to take charge. She realized, in that moment, that this wasn't just about the project anymore. This was about her stepping up in a way she hadn't yet done. It was about embracing the role of a leader, not just in title, but in action. She was ready for this, even if the thought of it was a little intimidating. With Victor's steady encouragement, Tasha started talking through the plans for the next phase. The more she spoke, the more confident she became. She realized that she knew this project inside and out. She understood the market, the potential, the challenges. She had spent months learning, growing, and now all that knowledge was paying off. By the end of the meeting, she had outlined the next steps clearly, and the team was fully on board. As the meeting wrapped up, Victor turned to her with a smile. "That was fantastic, Tasha," he said. "You've come so far. I knew you had it in you." Tasha felt a rush of pride. It wasn't just about the success of the meeting. It was about the fact that she had done it. She had taken control, led the team, and made decisions that would shape the future of the project. She hadn't done it alone, but she had been the one to step up, to take responsibility. As the weeks continued, Tasha's role in the project grew even more significant. She was no longer just a part of the team. She was leading it. She worked closely with everyone, guiding the project through each new phase. There were still challenges, of course, but with each one, she felt herself growing stronger and more capable. Through it all, Tasha never lost sight of what had brought her here. She had started from humble beginnings, serving coffee in a small shop, and now she was leading a team, making decisions that would impact not just her own life, but the lives of many others. It was a reminder that no matter where you start, no matter what obstacles stand in your way, determination and hard work can lead you to places you never thought possible. One evening, as Tasha sat in her office, reviewing some reports, she thought back to the day she had met Victor. She remembered how uncertain she had felt, how small she had thought her chances were. But now, as she looked at the work in front of her, she realized that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had found her place, and she was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. And that, she knew, was only the beginning. Tasha stood by the window of her office, looking out at the city below. It was a rare moment of stillness amidst the constant hustle and bustle of her life. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the skyline, and she found herself reflecting on how much had changed over the past few months. Her journey had been anything but easy, but now, as she looked back at everything she had accomplished, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. Just a short while ago, she had been working long hours at a small coffee shop, just trying to make ends meet. She had been living her life in a routine that felt predictable, if not a little stagnant. But then, one simple act of kindness had led to something unimaginable. She had stepped into a world of business that was both thrilling and daunting, and every challenge had only pushed her to grow stronger, smarter, and more confident. The project that had once seemed like an impossible dream was now a thriving reality. The team she had helped lead had made incredible progress, and the investors were more than pleased with the results. Tasha had done it. She had proven to herself and to everyone around her that she was capable of more than she had ever thought possible. The recognition and success felt good, but more than anything, it was the personal growth that made her feel truly fulfilled. She had learned so much, not just about business, but about herself. Victor, who had been her mentor from the very beginning, had always been there to guide her. His belief in her had never wavered, even when she doubted herself. He had seen something in her that she hadn't even seen in herself, and now, as she looked back at everything she had achieved, she could see it too. She had become the leader he had always believed she could be. And it wasn't just about business. It was about confidence, self-belief, and the understanding that no matter where you start, you can always go farther than you ever imagined. As the days turned into weeks, Tasha found herself thinking about the future more and more. She had come so far, but there was still so much more she wanted to do. She wanted to build something lasting, something that would help others just as she had been helped. She wanted to be the kind of leader who inspired others to believe in themselves, just as Victor had inspired her. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from him. "I've been thinking, Tasha. You're ready for more. It's time to take the next step." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. What did he mean by that? Was there more? What could be more than what she had already accomplished? She had been part of something big, but now Victor was suggesting there was another level she could reach. She was curious, but also a little nervous. Was she ready for whatever came next? Her fingers hesitated over the phone as she typed a response. "What do you mean?" A few moments later, his reply came. "Let's talk. I think you're ready to take on a bigger role. We've talked about this before, but now it's time to put it into action." Tasha felt her mind race. She had worked so hard, and now Victor was saying she was ready for something even bigger. Was she truly ready to take that next step? She thought back to the long nights of studying, the moments of doubt, the presentations, and the challenges that had shaped her into the person she had become. All of it had led her here. She had already done things she never thought possible. Maybe this was the next chapter in her journey. Later that day, she met Victor in his office. As usual, he was calm and collected, but there was a look in his eyes that told her this was important. He motioned for her to sit across from him, and after a brief moment of silence, he spoke. "Tasha, I'm proud of everything you've accomplished. You've taken charge, learned quickly, and proven yourself in ways I knew you could. But now, it's time for you to take full control. We're expanding the project even further, and I want you to lead it. You'll have the chance to make a real impact on a larger scale." Tasha felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Lead it? She had already taken charge of parts of the project, but this was different. This would mean taking on even more responsibility, overseeing a larger team, and making decisions that could affect more people. But as she thought about it, she realized that this was exactly what she had worked so hard for. This was the opportunity to truly step into her own. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves that were starting to rise in her chest. "I'm ready to take the next step." Victor smiled, a proud and reassuring look in his eyes. "I knew you would be. This is your chance to build something even greater, to leave your mark. I'll be here to guide you. But this is your time. Tasha couldn't help but smile. It felt surreal, yet at the same time, it felt like the natural next step in her journey. She had come so far already, and now she was ready to take on even more. She wasn't just going to be part of something big anymore. She was going to lead it. Over the next few months, Tasha took on the challenge with everything she had. The responsibility was greater, and the stakes were higher, but she never wavered. She worked tirelessly, building a team of talented individuals, overseeing every aspect of the project, and pushing it forward. With each milestone, she felt a deeper sense of fulfillment. This was what she had always dreamed of, a life where she wasn't just surviving, but thriving. And she knew that no matter where this journey took her, she was ready for whatever came next. The day came when Tasha stood before the team, presenting the final stages of the project. It had been a long road, but she had led them through every obstacle, every challenge. And now, as she looked out at the faces of the people she had worked with, she knew that they had accomplished something truly special. They had built something from the ground up, and it was going to make a lasting impact. Tasha smiled to herself, feeling a sense of pride that was hard to put into words. She had started from nothing, and now she was here, leading a team, making decisions, and shaping the future. The journey wasn't over, but it had been worth every moment. And as she looked ahead, she knew one thing for certain: the best was yet to come.